Phyllis was over in Turkey during the flotilla. She's part of the U.S. campaign to end the occupation, and I thought it might be just a good chance to update on what's going on and where Phyllis sees the most profitable organizing opportunities. So Phyllis, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. This is great. I mean, and it's a great sort of segue from today's discussions, which were mainly about Afghanistan and Iraq, to the other part of that region, that troubled region where our government is involved in so much bad stuff, to talk a little bit about Palestine. And I know all of you are following events. I'm not going to go through what happened with the flotilla and what it means. I think you all are pretty up to speed with that. I did do quite a bit of writing about the responses to the flotilla and what the results have been and what the potential is and stuff. So if you want to read any of those pieces, they're in a variety of places, Huffington Post and some others. But if you go to the IPS website, my institute's website, which is IPS-DC, and go to my project, they'll all come up. So, what I thought would make sense to talk about is how we in the U.S. fit into this global reaction to the flotilla. And I think we've been looking in the U.S. for the last, I guess, I'd say about 4 years, maybe longer, but at least 4 years, at a period of enormous growth in the pace of change in discourse over Israel-Palestine. So, for those of us who have been in it for a really long time, we can say, well, in 1978 it was blah, 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 and after 82 with the invasion, you can do all that, and it's all true. But the pace of that transformation has been dramatically increased in this last, say, 3 or 4 years. And you see it in how the conflict, quote, is talked about, that you don't always hear it talked about in the context of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, where at best you get somebody implying that maybe it's an even-handed thing where both sides have to make concessions, both sides are wrong, both sides have made mistakes, At best, that's what you can hope for. We've really gone beyond that, so that there is more and more discussion. It's not yet dominant. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here, but there is more and more discussion that starts from the framework of there is an Israeli occupation. Those of you who have been around this work for more than, say, 3 or 4 years, that's kind of a new development. Because framing it as the conflict means it's two sides. Both are right, both are wrong, they both should make concessions. If we want peace, everybody has to give up something. That's the best you can hope for, right? If you put it into the framework of occupation, what that gives you is the ability to talk about it from the vantage point of international law and human rights. And that transforms the responses to how you talk about it and what the possibilities are for working with other forces, with governments, with the UN, with the media, in a whole different way than when we used to say, we stand in solidarity with the heroic people of Palestine against the evil occupiers. That was sort of made us feel great, but it didn't get us very far, I gotta say. It didn't help the Palestinians very much, because it wasn't grounded in anything in this country. People couldn't relate to it. It was like, what? Who are you people? What we're seeing now is this new period where, by focusing on the role of the U.S. in enabling occupation and apartheid, human rights, international law, and UN resolutions, it's a whole different world of who can hear our message, who can grasp what we're talking about. And you saw that, in the aftermath of the flotilla. What was so extraordinary was the consistency, not only in the US, but it was most dramatic here, but all around the world, but most dramatically here. What people were talking about was the Israeli violations of international law. And maybe the U.S. was violating international law because of our military aid. It's like, what? You're admitting that? I mean, that was huge. Because I think up until a couple of years ago, the immediate instinct of supporters of Palestinian rights would have been, the Israelis are evil, this proves the occupation is evil. It would all be framed in a kind of morality framework. which there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's certainly accurate. It's completely immoral as well as illegal. It's wrong, it's evil. I mean, that's certainly true. But talking about it in those terms doesn't get us anywhere. So if the goal is really to change policy, it means talking about it as it's a violation of international law. And that puts us on the side of the United Nations. It makes it possible for us to identify and condemn the hypocrisy of the United States. That you claim to support international law. You claim to support the rule of law. This is your definition of the rule of law? If it was unknown people committing the same exact acts that were committed by the IDF, by the Israeli Navy, on board the Mavi Maramara, it would have been called piracy as the technical legal definition. Now, because it was a military, a flagged military, it's not piracy. Piracy, part of the definition in international law, is that it's committed by what, the technical term would be non-state actors. But what it basically means is, if you don't know who it is, if it's a bunch of people acting on their own, then it's piracy. If a state does it, in this case Israel, then it's a violation of a whole bunch of different laws. So we had people all around the world, and us in the US, saying that. And that's huge, because it raises the debate to a different level. Let me give you an example. During Operation Cast Lead, the Israeli assault against Gaza that began just after Christmas of 2008 and continued for 3 weeks until the middle of January of 2009, I spent most of that 3 weeks at the UN. I was working in the office of the guy who was then the president of the General Assembly, Miguel Descoto, Father Miguel Descoto, who some of you looking around this room, I'm thinking most of you, not you guys, will remember during the Sandinista years in Nicaragua. He was the foreign minister, Father Miguel. And he spent that year he had just started as the president of the General Assembly, a position that traditionally has been kind of a phony baloney sort of photo op, position that doesn't mean anything. When he took it on, he decided it was going to be different. He was going to do something real about it. And one of the things he did, first off, was to try and respond to the Gaza crisis. International law is international law. Whoever violates it should be held accountable. When Hamas violates international law, as they have on occasion, they should be held accountable. I have no problem saying that. Israel violates international law a whole lot more. And we are much more responsible, because we're funding them. We're paying $30 billion in U.S. aid to Israel. At the organizing level, I'm sort of grateful, I gotta say, to George Bush in this rather perverse way, which is that what he did in 2008 was to not just agree to give Israel $3 billion a year, which is what every president has done for the last several years. He said, we're going to give you $30 billion over the next 10 years. We're going to make a long-term commitment to prove how committed we are to the defense of Israel. Once you start talking about $30 billion, 10 years or not, you're talking real money. In Washington, $3 billion, that's chump change. Really. Kind of sick, but it is. $30 billion, you're talking about real money. So now that and of course one of the first things the Obama administration did was to decide and make public, we will implement the commitment to $30 billion of military aid. That gives us a great gift. That instead of just saying, well, it's wrong, we shouldn't provide any money to Israel, we can look at that and say, that $30 billion of our tax money that they're giving to this major military power with an illegal nuclear arsenal and the 5th strongest conventional military in the world, we're giving them $30 billion. You know what we could do with $30 billion? We could have 600,000 new green jobs in this country. $50,000 a year jobs in a union, green jobs, with benefits, with health care. That's huge. That's huge. People get that. You say to somebody, how would you rather spend $30 billion? Would you rather give it to the Israeli military so that they continue to violate international law and we get blamed for it? Or would you rather have that money stay home and be used for jobs? What's going to make us safer? I can promise you how most people are going to answer that question.